Welcome to Conversations That Count, a special podcast series hosted by MAS in celebration of International Women's Day. I'm your host, Anuki Premachandra, and today we're embarking on a journey to discuss the issue of gender parity in the corporate world. In this episode, I'm joined by Ajith Thomas from Unilever and Dinali Peiris from MAS, and together we're going to talk about the intentional strategies their companies have taken to address the issue of gender parity in the workplace. So why is it important for organizations to start taking a lead on this?
We strongly believe that the long-term success of the organization really rests on talent and the people that we are able to recruit and retain within the organization. And for me personally, the whole notion of gender equality is trying to create an environment where you recognize the needs of people and you create an equal playing field to the best of your possibility to help both men and women to succeed. The truth of the matter is that you can't just leave that to chance. And the organizations have to recognize that there is effort that needs to be put in and to ensure that this is really created for the employees that you have. So we took a bit of a top-down approach. It was important for us that the senior management and senior leadership understood what we were trying to do, the agenda we were trying to achieve. Once that was kind of in motion, we then looked at things like policies. So we introduced a flexi work policy. We introduced a paternity leave policy. We actually looked at organizations such as Unilever when we were devising these policies. We then looked at infrastructure. We then also looked at targets that we gave to our leadership and to our management. So these were all very intentional efforts and intentional strategies for us to kind of really achieve this.
One of the things that you just touched on now, and I just got my mind thinking, was on being intentional about some of these strategies and also addressing that unconscious bias. Ajit, even at Unilever, when the journey towards parity started, was that one of the first things that you think the company had to do?
The journey for us has evolved over a period of time, right? So when we started, we knew that this was important for us as an agenda item. We started to also realize that it was not only important to get women into the organization, you have to retain them also. We started with the agenda because we were also taking baby steps on this, right? We wanted to drive the agenda forward. We were also thinking along to say what are the steps that we can take to reach there. One of the steps later on, as we got into the journey, we realized is the culture of inclusion became super important, right? And to build that culture of inclusion, one of the steps was talking about unconscious bias, because everyone has their own biases. But if you can make people aware of it and they are conscious of it, it helps in sort of pushing the agenda a little bit forward. So that is the way that we took it forward.
That's really interesting. And I think that's really important in any case or scenario, whether you're a big corporate, whether you're a small company. We spoke about tracking and measuring progress. How does MAS track your leadership targets?
We as a team started tracking our numbers to try to understand, okay, is this needle moving? We were doing a lot of work and creating this awareness and putting policy and all of that, but the number was not moving. We have an ambitious aspiration to have 30% of women in leadership by 2025. Now, I have to tell you, at the time we introduced this, there were lots of views, very controversial. Like, is it then that you're just recruiting a lady or promoting a lady just to achieve a number? At that time, at MAS, we had very strong talent management processes. So you couldn't just recruit anyone into a role. You couldn't just promote anyone. We always believe in bringing on the best talent. In 2019, we were at 19%. When we ended last year, we have moved that to 24%. And we believe that the targets did help us achieve this. And we also focused on certain areas, especially on the talent attraction side, on succession development side. So, for example, we do measure the percentage of women on our succession pipelines. We ensure that all our leadership training programs, we have at least 30% of women participating. So beyond just the target of women in leadership, We do have some other indicators and measures that we also look at.
Ajit, do you have anything you can add in terms of this? Does Unilever have your targets? How has it been sort of pushing towards those targets? Is it a similar
I
journey?
think we've been on this journey for a long period of time, right? And as with any organization, I think our journey also started with the call of saying, what is the business case for having gender diversity, right? And I think there were reams and reams of research that was showing that, women in the business place, it helps you because they are the shoppers, they are the consumers, it helps you business, right? But then at some point of time, I think we also realized that you have to be on this journey because it's the right thing to do. The business case at one side, right? It's good to have a business case, right? I remember one of our CHROs, she said that, okay, people are asking me for the business case for women to be in business, but show me what is the business case you have for men being good for business. First, you show me that, and then we'll make a business case to say why women need to be in business, right? So I think for us, that conversation started to change a little bit to say it's a business case thing. It's important to have women to saying it's the right thing to do. Let's just do it because we do it. Targets were an important part of it, right? Like as in any organizations, the moment you give targets, there is a review system that kicks in. There are questions asked on why it is not achieved. And then you start to build systems and processes that help you reach there. For us, targets were important. We went the top-down route. We went and said, leaders, you have to role model this behavior in your teams. And we said that, yeah, as leaders, you are as accountable for driving business and business results as you are towards this agenda.
The targets and how you achieve that also helps you understand whether you need to check adjust what you're doing, because if those numbers are kind of not moving, it could mean that you've got to kind of check adjust what you're doing as well.
And I think it's important to understand that it's only when you start measuring your indicators, you start to realize where the challenges or the roadblocks are. Can we talk a little bit about that?
One of the things that we've been very good at is to sort of maintain a balanced slate when it comes to hiring. You have to make sure that you have an equal number of men and women competing for the role. The second part is internally, when we do moves, we have a process called casting for roles, where depending on the person's purpose, their experience, we sort of cast them into a role. We also want to make sure that, there is a balance slate there. Another thing that we realized is that in this journey on building gender balance in the organization, the easiest way to do it is to hire from other companies, right? You look at it and say, well, there's a great women leader there, let me just hire it. But that's a zero-sum game. So then we realized that the only way to do it is to build the pipeline. That is the only sustainable way to do it. So while we have targets at management levels to say how many women are at leadership, we also then started to dive a bit deeper and say, what is the pipeline looking like? Right? For example, we have programs in Unilever where we go to certain universities. We have targeted women universities where we hire from. We make sure that the people come in and then they're groomed to be women leaders of future. Starting from there is super important, and that's how one of the things also that we have done to sort of make sure that happens.
That's very interesting. What about
Very similar. When you look at MAS, we're predominantly a manufacturing organization designed to deliver. We have, close to 100,000 people that work for us. A good 80% of that population are women on the shop floor. And we don't really see our ladies progressing. It was something we were really challenged with. You have the pool right there. So we started looking at our team leaders and our group leaders on the shop floor, identifying those that had high potential to come into the executive grade, which requires for them to upskill themselves, sometimes professionally qualify, for them to step into those roles, but have a very focused kind of program in place. And to support that, we introduced a certificate program, a diploma program for the shop floor to enable our group leaders and team leaders to be able to qualify themselves for them to progress in the organization. Because just like Ajith said, having that pipeline is super important in those spaces. So areas such as industrial engineering, manufacturing, operations, predominantly you would see men that apply in than women. The way our operations and plants are constructed, another challenge that we faced was many of our interview panels were predominantly men. So we now have better gender representation. on the interview panels themselves. We ensure that that's there. And I have a funny story because sometimes this concept of chivalrous discrimination takes place during the interview. And I happened to experience that where I was on an interview panel. We were looking for a senior manager. We had three candidates that came in. And the moment the lady came in and she said her spiel, she left. She was very good, equally good. And my counterparts were like, Dinali, but she's got two young children. Do you think she's going to be able to go to the plant? Do you think she's going to be able to travel? And they were saying it with good intent, but I was more like, listen, don't you think we should ask her that question and give her that choice?
Also, never underestimate the power of role modeling, right? So when you make those iconic appointments, like for example, when we had our first factory manager as a woman in Agarpatna for our factory, it was a huge moment for us because the role modeling that women leaders can do for the other women in the organization is massive, right? And I think that role modeling that happens when you make those iconic appointments, make sure that you get the value out of it by making sure that the role modeling happens from there. And that is super important.
Very important. I couldn't agree more. And maybe I'll just share this because I think there could be some kind of relevance to what we're talking about. One of the things that we noticed is when we identify women who we believe are ready to take on some of these, I'm going to call it non-traditional roles that have been more, led by men before. They don't believe they are ready, right? And that really is because globally research shows that women tend to put their hand up for a role when they believe they're 100% ready and that they have ticked all the boxes. So we've had to almost coach some of these individuals, encourage them, because as you take on some of these roles, the responsibility that comes with it, along with what you need to do with the family, with society, all has to be balanced. And that's something that we've seen quite a lot when we've been encouraging some of our ladies to take up these positions that have not really been led by women before.
That's really interesting. And I think, I mean, Ajit touched on it too, right? That mental glass ceiling. I feel like women, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, and that's just thinking all from factory floor to board level, right? And that's different job roles, different levels of expertise. And with that, the perceptions of the jobs you can do, and traditional jobs that women aren't in, there's a big parity there as well. What do you have any thoughts about this? I mean, what efforts have your companies taken to build that mindset from
I
from
think the role modeling that happens, right? When you see other women in roles in which have never been done by women before, you also aspire and you feel that that's something one day that you can also do. You also need to have a strong mentoring network where these women can have conversations with other men and women leaders, learn the nuances of how things are going, and do that. So building that career plan with experiences, with the coaching, with the mentoring part. So that's one thing. Then comes the mindset. And I'm a firm believer, and I've had a lot of conversations with leaders where they've had really, really bad gender diversity in their teams, but they come and have a conversation with me to say, look, you ask the people around in my team, they'll all say that I'm very inclusive, I'm a great leader. It's just that I've not focused on gender till now, right? So my answer to them is there's nothing called selective inclusiveness. You're either inclusive or you're not. Another myth that I can tell you, right? When the business case for women in organizations was made, one of the points that comes across very strongly is that if you have women leaders, they tend to be more inclusive. They will create a more inclusive culture. So you're trying to hold them at a higher standard of leadership then, because there are equal number of women leaders who need coaching and support on how to be a good leader also, right? So you can't get women in and hold them to a higher standard than men, right? Are they also feeling that they got this role because they're a woman? So you have to actually clarify that, right?
One of the things that Ajit mentioned, which I think is very important for us at MAS, is really more that career planning and really identifying aspirations early on. And that's something that we really focus on, and that's helped helped on the agenda. As you go up in leadership, understanding the core of the business becomes very important. If you want to become a future CEO, but planning those careers, especially for the ladies, becomes super important because at some point they need to go to the factory. So planning it in at a time of their life when they may not have the additional responsibilities becomes important.
Just as sort of like concluding thoughts, let's discuss what the future looks like, both for MAS and for Unilever. Is there anything you think you'd want to do differently?
For Unilever, I think the good news for us is that at a leadership level, we are now gender balanced. So we've been like that for the last, I think, 1.5, 2 years in the journey, right? Our focus now is to continue to build that culture of inclusion that I talked about, because it's not only about getting that number, it's about retaining the women, making sure that they're able to bring their best to work. So all of those continue to be things that we will focus on. One thing I'm super excited about for this year is we are trying to work on a framework around psychological safety at workplace. It's basically a concept where we're saying that everyone should be able to bring their selves to work, their best selves to work. When you hear it, it sounds a bit fluffy and out there, right? But how do you build frameworks around it, right? Because it's not only good for women, it's good for everyone in the organization. But I'm super kicked about the fact that if we can do something which is actually tangible in that space, it'll help both men and women, but it also builds that inclusion even more, right? And I can definitely tell you it has a huge impact on business and growth mindset and everything, because then people will fear failure less, more ideas will be brought onto the table, but it definitely has an impact on inclusion also. For me, these are the couple of things. While we continue to do the things around policies, things around building the pipeline, things around unconscious bias and all of that, I'm super kicked about these two things for the next 2 years journey that we have.
Right, that sounds very exciting. What about you, Dinali?
I think the future is going to be very exciting, and I think we're very excited with the work that we're doing at MAS as well. We will stick on this agenda. We'll continue to check, adjust, drive it hard. We have that aspiration that that we're going towards. When we started, our efforts were very Sri Lanka centric, but we are also in 14 other countries, and we have just started a policy on global mobility and global talent rotation. And I've had a chance to visit many of the countries, and I see some astounding ladies on the shop floor in countries such as Indonesia and Vietnam. And I'm super confident that our aspirations of having a first women GM, first manufacturing directors is probably going to come from some of those locations, using some of those countries and examples to drive change. Also, I mean, for example, in Indonesia, in one of our operations, we have the same operation here in Sri Lanka where all the machinery is run predominantly by men. In our Indonesia operation, it's run completely by women. So complete mindset change. So sharing those global examples to drive change. And sometimes, everyone wants a little bit of competition, as well, in terms of if they can do it, why can't we? So just continuing to use that. Very exciting piece of work that we're doing as we look towards the future.
Wonderful. And I wish you both the very best. So thank you so much for joining me in this podcast. I hope you had a good conversation as well.
Oh, we did. Thank you so much for having us.
All right, guys. I don't know how to end this.
Great.